For the first time in my short YouTube career, I've done a second take of a shot. That was because I was bending this book too much. The audio sounded horrible. Now, what book was I bending? This is the Odyssey by Homer. And I have it in my hands because, as I'm sure you're aware, Christopher Nolan has just released his version of the Odyssey in cinemas now. There's been a lot of uproar online, a lot of opinions had, a lot of comments made. And me personally, I haven't seen the Odyssey yet, Christopher Nolan's Odyssey. I'm actually going to be seeing it tomorrow. But there was a time, not too long ago, where I was adamant and I refused to watch the Odyssey on principle, because I fell for the rage bait. You know, I saw, was announced, the posters come out, the casting comes out, the trailers come out, and it looks like, the Odyssey's gone woke. It's going to be garbage. And so I thought it would be the principled position to not watch it. But having friends who enjoy cinema and the arts, there was much discussion about this. And the error of my ways was proven to me. And so, after much reflection, today I went on a little odyssey of my own to consolidate my thoughts as to why I was wrong. I was wrong for trying to boycott the Odyssey. So, if you want to hear my reasoning, follow me along on this little journey.
Is it possible for modern man to undertake an odyssey, to take a journey and return home changed? Since the splitting of the atom, man has not had a home, precisely because his security in it has vanished. Now all it takes is the push of a button, and one's home could be obliterated for all time, not to mention the machines and their relentless attempts to make man at home inside a screen. To add insult to injury, those who have lost faith in the safety and security of the home have also lost its history. The silent voices that survived the flash of the atom offered no initiation to their descendants, and those who did decide to speak, even the words that spilled from their lips were a radiogenic horror.
Where did it all go wrong? This is a question many of us will ask in our age. And a question I need to ask myself in regards to my response, my initial response to Christopher Nolan's Odyssey. Now, I haven't seen the film yet, but I already know I was wrong to attempt to boycott it on principle. And this has come about through discussion, and there seems to be two ways of engaging with Nolan's Odyssey online at the moment. Two kind of, takes on the film that have come out. One is that it's a betrayal of the Western tradition and the Western canon, and it's the Odyssey gone woke. The other is that the film's actually a Trojan horse, and it's pro-Western tradition, clothed in woke garb. Now, I would argue that neither of these interpretations are viable, precisely because their viability rests on placing Christopher Nolan into the category of hero or heretic. Now, to place someone into either of those categories, the fundamental thing has to be the same: that they see the tradition clearly. Now the question arises, can Christopher Nolan see the Western tradition clearly? And I would argue, no, he cannot. Why? Because I don't believe anyone since the splitting of the atom has viewed the Western tradition clearly. There was an event of such magnitude that it altered both the transmission of and the initiation into the Western canon. And so I say this for myself as well, that I cannot see the Western tradition clearly. I am trying, but I am incapable of doing that. And this is where it gets complicated. Because if one cannot see the tradition clearly, as regarding the tradition, they cannot be either labelled a hero or a heretic. They can be labelled a pagan at best, or confused at worst. And I would argue that most people fall into the confused camp. And what do I mean by seeing it clearly? There's much I could talk about here that's not in the purview of this video. But the simple point I would make is that seeing it clearly, seeing a tradition clearly, means that the tradition shapes someone's life and forms them in a fundamental way. Now, I won't stay at length here, but I think the argument is relatively strong that that is not the case for people in the West as regards the Western tradition. There's many examples of this that I can get into, but I'd argue you to think for yourself, and I'm sure you will find plenty of examples for that case. Now, if you agree with this premise that Nolan can't fall into the label of hero or heretic as regards the Western tradition, well, the best case scenario you have is that it's either some kind of pagan retelling of the Odyssey, or it's a degenerate retelling of the Odyssey. But again, we run into problems here, because how can we tell what it is? If we know he's not a hero or a heretic, what means do we have for determining if he's a pagan or a degenerate? Now, before we address that, we must ask this question. Can modern man go on an Odyssey? Now, going on an Odyssey, it involves going away from home and then returning. And the question is, yes, physically, modern man can move away from home. He can go further than he's ever been before. But can he ever really leave behind his domestic comforts? That's a very, very interesting question to think about. Now, convenience can follow us everywhere we go, even all around the world. We have our phones, access to food, GPS, the list goes on. And then even if you remove those things, can he actually see nature for what it is? Can he leave behind his comfortable ideals? Now, that's a question you'll have to answer for yourself. And I would argue that it is possible. It's just very, very difficult these days. And due to that difficulty that modern man has in embarking upon the hero's journey properly, or going on an Odyssey, it's very hard to tell if Nolan's Odyssey is a pagan or degenerate version. We can't tell. So, if we can't tell where Nolan sits regarding his Odyssey, can we let the Odyssey just speak for itself? Again, there is a lot we can get into here. But I would argue, fundamentally, no, Nolan's Odyssey, it can't speak for itself. Why can't it speak for itself? Because we no longer have the frameworks through which to allow a film to speak for itself, which we have to allow for something to speak objectively. Those frameworks have been stripped away to such a degree that a lot of people are in confusion as to if they will ever return. Now, if this film can't speak for itself because we don't have the tools and the framework to hear its objective voice, this presents a few issues. All the arguments against the viewing of the film become pointless, because if there's no framework to hear the objective voice of the piece, well, whether it's woke or right wing, doesn't actually mean anything. We're making it mean what we want it to mean. And herein lies all the question. If you were receptive to it speaking objectively to you, could it speak objectively to you? I would answer no. You might posit that there is a tradition of films about the Odyssey that may allow Nolan's Odyssey to speak objectively within that small tradition. Maybe if you have watched all the previous versions of the Odyssey, because there are a few, The Return being one which I have watched with Ralph Fiennes, highly recommend, and read the text. Maybe if you watched those films and read the text, Nolan's Odyssey could speak objectively in that tradition. But this doesn't work either, because those collections of films aren't really a tradition, because they're not built upon each other in some kind of linear fashion, like tradition requires. They're just isolated, singular events pointing back to the text itself, eliminating the possibility of any tradition there to speak to us. Now, this is interesting because some of the criticisms that have come about online regarding Nolan's Odyssey is the translation that it uses. And now, sure, there's certain arguments about that, but these arguments have happened before. Back in the 1800s and the 19th century, there was a revival of the Odyssey in popular culture that engendered many folk songs and poems, such as Enoch Arden by Tennyson, which is one of my favourite poems. And we saw before the 18th century, we saw Alexander Pope's translation of the Odyssey, which was a great change to the original text. Some would say that it was heretical to the tradition. Others would say that it was taking the tradition forward. But the tradition still meant something to those people back then, and they could take a position. Alexander Pope, he may be a hero to some in the Western tradition. He might be a heretic to others. But regardless, we cannot make those kind of judgments of Christopher Nolan's adaptation in film now. And so another example that I want to bring up as to providing evidence for the fact that we actually can't discern the motives nor let it speak to us is what people do with the story. And I'm very thankful that one of my friends had seen some of the same videos to me. And maybe you've seen some similar videos yourself. But the proper and respectful relationship to myth and these mythical stories in various traditions is that of a child. And the example I brought up to my friend was that you may tell a child of the story of St. George fighting the dragon, a story of courage and overcoming. And that child might apply that story to his experience of riding a bike. It's terrifying, he's scared, but he might say, I'm St. George and this bike is my dragon. I'm going to overcome it. Now, from a distance, it might seem that the kids are being disrespectful, to the myth and to the great hero, and that they're kind of degrading them in some way by making riding a bicycle analogous to slaying a dragon. But they're actually being the most respectful to the myth, because they're LARPing, live action role playing, as the hero in the story. They are saying that this character, St. George, he operates in a higher realm. He has a higher degree of virtue than they. And by turning the experience of riding a bike into an analogy of St. George and the dragon, they were respecting that difference, the higher place that the hero in the myth exists in, and they're trying to raise themselves to that standard. And that is the ultimate respect you can pay to a hero or a mythic story. Now look at what's already happened with Nolan's Odyssey today. Odysseus, the classic scene, strings the bow, reveals that it's him. Well, instead of people trying to recognizing Odysseus' place as a mythological heroic figure, people drag him down into their own lives. I saw one video of a man who was putting a light together, a film light with a structure around it that had some rods, and as he was putting the rods in, bending the rods into place, he was making the analogy that I'm like Odysseus stringing the bow. And that's not to put the myth and the hero in a higher place. That's to bring them down and to say, look, the hero is just like me. But doesn't that say enough about our interpretation of the text? Oh, the heroes are just like me. Odysseus, he's me. Or whatever character you want. Doesn't that show that we can't interpret the text properly? And the fact that this is allowed to happen, or even encouraged by some directors, doesn't that mean that they don't know how to interpret properly? So all this is to say that if you're going to have a take on the Odyssey, there's only one possible take that you can have. We can't tell if Nolan's a hero or a heretic, he's a pagan or a degenerate. We can't let this film speak to us objectively. And even if we did, we wouldn't know what to do with it. And that's say there's only one take on Nolan's Odyssey. And I can say this without having watched it, and it was the take of a good friend who had watched it before me. And he simply said this. He too had hesitations, and he was convinced by other arguments to go and see it, but he saw it. And his experience was this. Oh, there were some things I didn't like, but fun and good film. And for now, that's it. That's it. That's all we can say. That's the take on Christopher Nolan's Odyssey. And that's the take I'll have tomorrow when I go and watch it. Because if it has some objective meaning, if it has some bigger impact, well, we're only going to know through time. We're only going to know as history plays out. So we'll have to wait and see. But until then, sit back and enjoy. Now that I've given you my arguments as to why there can only be one interpretation of Christopher Nolan's Odyssey as I speak at this time, I want to read a passage to you at the conclusion of my journey, and one that is near the conclusion of Odysseus' journey when he returns to Ithaca. Now, the translation I have in my hands reads as follows. The good Odysseus now awoke from sleep on his native soil. After so long an absence, he failed to recognize it, because the goddess, Pallas Athene, daughter of Zeus, had thrown a mist over the place. Her intention was to make Odysseus unrecognizable, to tell him precisely how things stood, and to prevent his being recognized by his wife and friends or the people of the town before the suitors had paid for all their transgressions. As a result, everything in Ithaca, the long hill paths, the welcoming bays, the beetling rocks and the leafy trees, seemed unfamiliar to its king. Now, I mention this for a very important reason. It is possible, and we must not lose hope, but someone somewhere might have been struck by Christopher Nolan's Odyssey. It might have inspired in them a new desire, a desire to take an Odyssey of their own. But here's the important part. When Odysseus returns to Ithaca, he's presented as a beggar. The land is unknown to him, and he is hidden from the land. Why is this? It says here that Pallas Athene's intention was to make Odysseus unrecognizable, to tell him precisely how things stood. Now, this is a principle relating to the hero's journey. Any kind of transformative journey that you go on, there is a time when you come home. But if you have been changed, home will become unfamiliar to you. And so it's very important that if you go on this journey, you take the time. You don't reveal your revelations too quickly. You don't disclose them. Because if you do, you might not see things as they are. And the suitors might not be brought to justice. So all that's to say, even if Christopher Nolan's Odyssey was a transformative experience for someone, we won't be able to know for some time. Thank you for watching.